Only one thing can save us. We have to increase our mastery of the world. All this damage has come about through our conquest of the world, but we have to go on conquering it until our rule is absolute. Then, when we're in complete control, everything will be fine. Daniel Quinn, from Ishmael. Now there's a sentiment most of us can wrap our minds around, that we humans have so botched our tenancy on this planet that there's nothing for it but to stick with the mad plan that got us this far. Halfway lost is halfway found. What will be there to greet us when we stumble, bloodied and dazed, out of the woods? Well, we're not quite sure. But worrying about the future doesn't get us anywhere. Never has, never will. Quarterly profit statements are a good indicator of our fixation on the here and now. Will a business survive even into the next month if it's worried about the next 100 years? Obviously not, and so our exertions must be directed toward taking care of today. Tomorrow will take care of itself. Far from espousing the Iroquoian notion that we should deliberate in light of the seventh generation to follow us, our gambit is that the seventh generation had damn well better be advanced enough to handle the problems we intend to dump at its feet. Has it always been thus, a feckless primate manhandling the planet, its creatures, its future? Well, it seems that for as long as humans have been upright, we've been very good at taking. But when the species was young, it could not take very much. Some wood for the fire, a handful of shells for the shaman's pouch, a few feathers and furs for the garb. There were not many of us, perhaps 1 million at most, scattered about the habitable parts of the globe, and the world was a cornucopia. What we took was not missed. For 70,000 years, nothing much changed. But over the last few millennia, the scale of operations broadened, our numbers ballooned, and our means of altering physical reality grew commensurately. Indeed, in just the last 200 or 300 years, humankind has seemed bigger than the world itself, our power multiplied by technology to the point that we can only be compared to the other grand forces of nature, the tides, the shifting plates, the climates. By the time we noticed the stillness on the plains and the silence in the forests, it was much too late to withdraw our bloody hands. All the bison had been skinned and the parakeets plucked, the ancient hills leveled and the salmon streams buried. The sky itself was thickened and the shallow seas scraped clean. We had reached the edge of the world, and the abyss dropped away before us just as the stories foretold. There was simply not enough world left to satisfy 7 billion souls' ambitions, perhaps not even their barest needs. The world is a mysterious place, and it comes with no instructions. The human predicament has always been a topic for scholarly thought. The same existential questions have been pondered again and again across all divisions of knowledge. The observation of the remotest star in the innermost recesses of the mind, the labor of poets and engineers, the tracking of amphibian populations in the dollar, all converge on the basic unanswerables of humane inquiry. Who are we? Where are we going? What shall we do? Yet it's possible, even reasonable, to argue that answers to these questions are pursued so vigorously only because we lack a durable, satisfying framework for living in the here and now. In its absence, we are compelled to imagine that if we could just amass a bigger collection of facts, we might thereby soothe the ache of our mortal condition and bring into being that better world our investigations hint might be possible. In the meantime, our efforts at mastery continue to mutilate the earth, almost as if to secure the future we intended to destroy the present. In our honest moments, we recognize this folly. We know the collapse is coming. The Malthusian calculus was never disproved, only delayed. The real problem, of course, is not with our know-how. If all that were required was reason and technique, we could repair the mess tomorrow. But the problem is thornier than that. Every one of us intuits, deep down, that we are not quite at peace with the world. We seem constitutionally dissatisfied with it. Children, as soon as their hands are nimble enough, begin to reshape the earth. With sand, dirt, or snow, they raise up mounds, mold walls and dams, cut canals and tunnels. The urge to terraform, evidently, arrives early. We call this creativity, and we applaud it. They form islands in their porridge, hills and valleys in their rice. They lift towers from wooden blocks, veritable babbles of Lego. And then, predictably, they smite what they've made, like tiny vengeful gods. They were not content, wasn't right, not good enough, too imperfect. A child is a miniature of the man, and like his father, he creates and destroys with almost equal zest. Perhaps something has been removed from us, or perhaps something's been added. Either way, we no longer fit the earth as other animals do. We must make it fit us. We understand what we're up against, ourselves, but we fail to leverage our comprehension into anything but more grasping. No matter the terrible costs of unbridled desire, we, quote, want and want and want, unquote, as Joy Williams writes, believing in ourselves excessively. And whatever it is that we want, we're willing to pull the whole edifice of life down on our heads to get it. We are the new Easter Islanders, cutting down the last tree to roll the last stone head up the last unmonumented slope, smug in the knowledge that though we've doomed ourselves, at least by God we're going to finish what we've started. According to Quinn's Ishmael, who happens, by the way, to be a 1,000-pound telepathic gorilla with an outsider's insight into the human condition, the struggle against our own imperious gluttony repeats the pattern of a long-standing cultural battle between what Quinn calls the takers and their counterparts, the leavers. Takers created all the great civilizations the world has ever known, including our own. They make a mark on the world, and they strive for permanence. Leavers, by contrast, deal with the exigencies of living in a gentler way. These cultures are pre-agricultural. They do not settle in one place and generate the surpluses of food that can tide them over while they pursue other ends. Leavers move from food source to food source, always keeping their populations low and never taxing the ecosystem. Nomads, hunter-gatherers, subsistence herders, pastoralists, these so-called primitives enacted a different cultural story than that of the takers, which claims that the world belongs to man. The leaver's story, by contrast, says that man belongs to the world. Needless to say, the competition between leaver cultures and taker cultures was settled long ago, notably in the fertile regions of the Middle East, where the ancient Semitic herds peoples were displaced by the taker agriculturalists, who would eventually give rise to the great civilizations in Mesopotamia and along the Nile. There are very few of these leaver cultures left, and almost none are intact. A few Bushmen of the Kalahari, some remote Amazonian tribes, the Spinifex of the great Australian desert, the North Sentinelese. We don't know a great deal about leaver history because, in a sense, they left no history. Humans, living day to day, in harmony with one another and with the world, rehearse the same story over and over again. Linear history only begins when the taker agricultural strategy interrupts or destroys the endless, repetitive cycle of days. The wanderers settle down, create granaries and storehouses, towns and cities, temples and roads, markets and money, owners and workers, weapons and wars. Then there are many stories to tell. If we accept this frame tale for the origins of humanity's dysfunction, and why not, it's as good as any, we still have the problem of explaining why we have not managed to overcome our taker mentality in the last few hundred years, as we proceeded through a remarkable period of human flowering known variously as the Enlightenment or modernity. It was during this epoch that humankind, or rather European humankind, came to understand itself and its surround world in ways that opened up new possibilities for care and concern vis-a-vis one another and nature. Driven by scientific, technological, social, and political advances, Euroman was able to assess his existence in all of its dimensions, for good or for ill, and the taker mentality that ruled for so long was brought into sharp relief. It wasn't abandoned, far from it, but the disadvantages of treating the world as a resource basket and a waste receptacle began to emerge. As the continents and oceans were mapped, assayed, and commodified, it dawned on some that the planet was finite, and that humans could have profoundly negative effects upon it. Were some refinements to our approach thus called for? They were. Yet if we look around us now, we see that regardless of those refinements, the impact of humankind on the planet is undiminished. It falls heavier, in fact, each year, each day, each minute. Simply put, it was the takers who set down the fundamental principles of what I will call the Brown vision of the world, marked by resource exploitation, intensive cultivation, unlimited population and economic growth, regardless of cost to the planet. And no green alternative has managed to budge more than a handful of us off those principles. Think of the many historically noted but practically inconsequential crypto leavers: the diggers, the Mennonites, the Shakers, the Fourierists, the hippies, the bioregionalists, the vegans, the animal people. All of these groups were and are regarded suspiciously, suckers off the main trunk of history, doomed to the margins as curiosities, laughingstocks, or worse, perversions of a full-blooded humanity. The lesson here is that a reduction of human suzerainty on this planet is not culturally viable. We define ourselves as the earth's lords and masters, and we guard our dominion jealously. The first commandment of humankind might as well be, "Thou shalt never willingly scale back." Instead, Homo colossus must go forth and multiply its power across the entire range of material existence. Do we place any limits on our ambitions? Only one, which is that we will limit any discussion of human limits. We must proceed through to full modernity with technological, managerial, and economic advancements, providing the means by which our admittedly heavy footprint will somehow, magically, be rendered tolerable. The phrase sustainable development describes this impossible dream, whereby our massive combined impact is imagined to lessen even as the sum of our activities increases without end. It's no wonder we're able to hold such an obvious biophysical contradiction in mind. According to the anthropologist Lionel Tiger, we're hardwired optimists. Our DNA codes for positive thinking. And as the great British-Polish sociologist Zygmunt Bauman puts it, quote, "All human cultures can be decoded as ingenious contraptions calculated to make life, with the awareness of mortality, livable." Unquote. It stands to reason, then, that when we place bets on the future, for example, by calculating that some techno-fix will come along to mitigate the effects of pumping 20 gigatons of CO2 into the atmosphere each year, we are predisposed to assume the deck is stacked in our favor. So we'll take the long odds. No guts, no glory. There is everything to gain and only house money to lose. There's something deeply unsettling about an enlightenment that turns a green and blue world into a brown one. Is shooting yourself in the foot too weak an ascription? Max Horkheimer puts his finger on at least one of the paradoxes when he notes that, quote, "the domination of nature involves the domination of man," unquote. But let's stick for a moment with just the domination of nature. It seems that the modern rationalization of things deals out death as it tries to enhance human life. The poet Gary Snyder focuses on this problematic in "One should not talk to a skilled hunter about what is forbidden by the Buddha." A gray fox, 9 pounds 3 ounces, 39 5/8 inches long with tail, peeling skin back. Kai reminded us to chant the Shingyo first. Cold pelt, crinkle, and musky smell, mixed with dead body odor starting. Stomach content, a whole ground squirrel well chewed, plus 1 lizard foot, and somewhere from inside the ground squirrel, a bit of aluminum foil. The secret, and the secret hidden deep in that. Beginning with the close forensic examination of the dead fox, an anatomy lesson that harkens back to the early moments of scientific medicine, and through the quick summary of the fox's food web, Snyder draws on the standard lines of the modern method: observation, classification, quantification, inference. But then the poem turns. The anomalous bit of foil, the Reynolds wrap that must have held its razor edge through the chewing and digestion, so as to be ready to slice open the lining of the fox's stomach. The internal bleeding, the slow, incomprehensible death that overtakes him from within. That's the secret. And the secret, hidden in the secret, that humankind built this blade in the smithy of our great enlightenment. Knowledge given form. Like most of our modern products, it's a casual thing, to be cast aside, forgotten by us, but never forgotten by nature. One of the 4 principles of ecology, as famously explained by Barry Commoner, everything must go somewhere. There is no waste in nature, and there is no away to which things can be thrown. That bit of foil you use to cover a plate of leftovers winds up in somebody else's belly. So it goes with your computer, your car, your diapers, your dishwater, your Glade Solid, your Toms of Maine, your mercury, your fuel rods, your Wi-Fi, your winding sheets, your coffin, your body. All the effluvium in the spinning, sucking modern gyre vomits forth into nature, which isn't just around you, but is you. And so, literally, as Horkheimer says, quote, the domination becomes internalized for domination's sake, unquote. And then there is the story of the monkey and the gorilla presented with jars full of nuts. The monkey puts his hand in the jar, closes his fingers around them, and then can't get his fist back out. He's stuck. He can't get the nuts, but he refuses to let go of them. By contrast, the gorilla, when it's clear he can't get his fist past the bottleneck, releases the nuts. He thinks for a moment, then flips the jar over and pours the nuts into his palm. The story is meant to tout the intelligence of the great apes, our nearest cousins. To me, it illustrates another point. Humans just love experiments that show they're smarter than animals, better, more worthy, made in God's image. Quote, only man's soul can be saved. Animals have but the right to suffer, unquote. Max Horkheimer. This anthropocentric mentality is embedded in our everyday discourse, and we are hard put to form sentences that do not betray our self-importance. Here, for example, is an axiom from a recent introductory textbook on human ecology. Quote, the ecosystem provides services to the social system by moving materials, energy, and information to the social system to meet people's needs, unquote. A student reading this claim might be forgiven for imagining that nature's central goal here is to be our unpaid gopher. Although the book wishes to challenge the dominant exploitative paradigm of development, it speaks with the same forked tongue as the conceptual regime it opposes. Such is the way of most of our discourse. It has, not surprisingly, evolved to express our sense of cosmic centrality and entitlement. In effect, humanity is the action star in all the scripts that are churned out by Hollywood sapiens. The cameras don't even start rolling until we walk onto the set. Well, the world wants to be deceived, said Theodore Adorno. Or, as Mark Twain put it, denial ain't just a river in Egypt. But like most addicts, we know we've got a problem. Sometimes we're quite sure of it, as when our leaders and their surrogates gathering in Davos, Camp David, or the latest G7, G8, or G20 junket frighten us a little bit with their talk of economic downturns, global risks, and climate emergencies. So we're more interested than ever in the words and ideas that might get the monkey off our backs, the monkey being this terminal arrogance that causes us to equate disaster with progress. We're particularly keen to hear from those who saw the train wreck coming and offered us a way to avoid it. A cynic might observe that it's the vanity of this age to want its death throes articulated, the better to whistle past the graveyard. We look to one such as Henry David Thoreau, who sought voluntary simplicity in the woods outside of Concord, Massachusetts. Thoreau, grieving from the horrible death of his brother from Lockjaw, built a 10 by 12 foot cabin of recycled lumber near the shore of a small lake, and there began a healing process that eventually became one of the most famous American self-help books of all time, Walden. Thoreau says in the essay Walking that, quote, "In wildness is the preservation of the world," unquote. Furthermore, he claims that, quote, "life consists with wildness," unquote, and that he would have, quote, "a wildness whose glance no civilization could endure," unquote. What does he mean by that? There isn't a whole lot of wilderness left. But wait, he said wildness, not wilderness. Two distinct, albeit related quantities. It's not wild places he requires, though he was fond of those to be sure. It's more a state of mind he asks us to adopt, a freedom from constraints imposed by manners, civility, the marketplace. He believes that the savage lurks within us and we need to let him out. We have a natural taste for the solace of the swamp, the marrow of the woodchuck, the liquor of the pine needle. We will, quote, "import wildness into the cities at any price," unquote. Thoreau challenges us to give in to what we secretly crave, not the grasping, self-defeating, self-loathing hankering for cultural baubles and trinkets, but the primal pulse of the jungle, the interior wilderness of total uncivility that beats in our Paleolithic breasts. He would no doubt concur with Horkheimer about the modern dilemma that in order to subjugate non-human nature, man must, quote, "subjugate nature in himself," unquote. But that was the wrong choice. By putting nature in chains, we unknowingly put our best selves under lock and key as well. For those who would like us to adopt the Thoreauvian way, then, the first step is simply to recognize our subjugation to the false god of civilization. Only then can we begin a process of rewilding, the selective restoration of our lost connection with the world around us. And once we peel away the artificial wrappings and prosthetic mediations that color all our relationships with one another in the object world, well, anything is possible. We could, for example, end the application of industrial age assembly line processes to the growing of food or the education of children. We could reconfigure our cities and towns as communities of walkers instead of communities of cars. We could live between dawn and dusk and return the stars to the sky. We could become a culture of makers instead of consumers. We could live according to the seasons instead of the financial cycles. And we could direct our energy, time, values, and spirit toward inhabiting the world rather than toward rendering it uninhabitable. Well, you might counter that Thoreau asks a lot of us. We've come too far on the upper slopes of modernity to roll back our gains. Sure, a canoe trip or a walk through the woods is a healthy pastime, but to devolve into a raging wolfman sounds like the plot of a horror movie, not a realistic solution to urban angst or global warming. We need the opposite of wildness. You might argue a fuller tameness, a more thorough suppression of our animal instincts and those unstructured urges that give rise to unhappiness, unrest, crime, pollution, or war. You might call for a tightening of our reasoning mask, a rededication to the principles of prudence, good judgment, and sobriety. Forward, always forward. You might say that even if civilization is a jetliner, as T. Fulano writes, and even if the flight is bumpy and the pilot and co-pilot seem to be sleeping or stoned, and even if the rivets are popping out and the airframe is twisting, and even if the flight attendants seem to be spending all their time up in first class serving drinks to the well-heeled, well, we can't very well invite a lion aboard to run roaring up and down the aisles now, can we? You might say, let's be serious people for a minute, enlightened people. We need to fix this thing true, mid-flight if we have to, and get it back on course. Maybe it is on course anyway, and all this turbulence is just a patch of rough air. You might say, don't give up on hope. Hope is what got us here, and if our hope is audacious enough, then so much the better. Or you might say, thinking now well and truly outside the box, okay, let's play it safe. Let's bring this machine down to a soft landing and send for the people who designed it, the experts, and get them to tune it up. Only when we're absolutely assured of its safety will we press on with patience and good cheer toward the awaiting utopia. Or you might be one of those who says, wait a minute, what are you complaining about anyway? I didn't feel any bumps, and my pretzels and tomato juice are right here on my tray. And by the way, I need to take a nap, so would you please keep it down? Enjoy the flight. You might say any or all of those things, and that would mean on the one hand that you've missed the whole point of my essay, but on the other that you understood it all too well, that you realized you and I are passengers in this jet, strapped into the seats, chained to them to tell the truth, and that hope, prayer, and faith in the unseen engineers, wherever they are, is about all we've got left. I was in our university research library the other day, and I heard a young woman say to a young man, "Originally, I wanted to do animal rights, but there's no money in animal rights." I knew exactly what she meant. There's not much money in saving animals, let alone money for researching how to save them. The real money is in killing animals and finding new ways to eat them. There's also no money in saving trees. The money is in cutting them down and finding new ways to turn them into chopsticks. And there's no money in saving you from your own desires. The money is in making you turn away from what you already have toward all the things you don't. And finally, there is no money in the facts. The money is in making the facts support money and those who possess it in abundance. But is there no money in saving the planet and ourselves? It would be pretty to think so. I do know there's money in selling the planet short, which is actually a technical term. To financiers, it means betting that over time the value of something will decline and, in essence, profiting from that decline. The short trade is a metaphor for the broader program of which we're all a part. If you've ever come across a book with a title like 50 Simple Things You Can Do to Save the Planet, or 365 Ways to Live Green, or something along those lines, just keep in mind that each day in a million different ways, of which most you are unaware, you yourself are selling the planet short. So I would say that between choosing the green future and the other, there is only our collective will. And at this point, it's not at all clear that our collective will hasn't already chosen the brown.